when you answer an objection as a salesperson, how much trust do they have that you're telling them the truth as opposed to telling them what they want to hear because you're trying to sell them something? Right? So there's just the fact that they asked it, and whatever you say after they asked it, and some people are more skeptical and cynical than others, and I get that that's a spectrum too. Not everybody distrusts everything a salesperson says, but we are, to greater or lesser degree, conditioned to think that when I ask a question or bring up an objection and the salesperson answers, there's part of me thinking, of course you're supposed to say that. What are you going to do? Tell me I'm right and this is a bad idea? You're obviously going to give me the answer that you think will get the sale. So even though I asked you the question and it's not really fair for me to not believe your answer, I can't help but be skeptical because you didn't bring it up and it was in response to my bringing it up. I'm going to be like, whatever you say, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. Like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I just don't fully believe it. Now, again, there's varying degrees of that, and it's not always true, but there's an element of that in every case. If you overcome an objection, and the more you sound like a salesperson, back to the same point there, it's hard to not sound like a salesperson. You're overcoming an objection and you're like, especially if you sound defensive and you're like, oh, well, no, that's not a problem. The more you sound like, oh crap, I was hoping you weren't going to ask that, then the more they distrust your answer. But even if you have a great answer and you sound confident, there's just this little distrust, like, yeah, but is that really true? Or are you just telling me what I want to hear? So by answering a question or an objection before it comes up, you take away the possibility of them thinking you're just saying that to overcome my objection. And they're more likely to trust you just because you volunteered it than if you had said it in response. So answering objections before they come up is great. Now, the one thing I would say though is, and not to disagree with what Trevor said about it, because I think we probably feel the same way about it, but there's a little bit of a I guess another side to it. If I overcome all their objections, I also feel there's a danger in that. I want to overcome the objections that are the real problem. I want to try and leave them room to have questions and concerns though, because in my experience, depending on the bigger the size of the sale, the more this comes into play. But some people don't feel like they made a good decision unless they did their own version of like due diligence of asking some questions and having some objections. And it's almost like if I answer all the objections preemptively, they're at the end going like, that was just too easy. There's almost this, I don't want to be a lay down. I don't want to, I feel like I need to have some objections or some kind of resistance. I want to leave them room for that. So I might leave some objections that aren't a big deal, that are easy to answer, but anything that I think could be an issue, right? And that I know they have that objection, I'm going to cover it. The other thing is, which kind of goes back to the original thing I was saying, I overcome the objections that I'm confident they have. But if there's some that 50% of people have, but it's not necessarily a big issue that I have to preempt, then I may not cover that one before it comes up, because number one, it may not come up and I don't want to bring it up. But number two, that's maybe one that I leave as, an objection that they still get to have. So they can feel like, yeah, I put up some resistance. I asked some questions, I pushed back. And then now they feel like they kind of went through a buying decision methodically. And it's just something about the psychology of making a buying decision. And it's not everybody's that way, but there are people who would not feel like it could be a good decision if they didn't have some kind of questions and objections. So, but in general, if you know it's an objection that they're going to ask and you're confident that they're going to ask and it's important, you should overcome it. It should be built into your presentation. So number one time to answer or either answer a tough question, overcome an objection before it comes up.